Hey, I'm here with Sam Fishman from Music Hack, the creators of a plugin called Master Plan. We're going to talk about soft clipping, hard clipping, limiting. What are the differences between all of these things? We've got visual tests, we've got listening tests, so stick around. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to get talking about this. Where should we start?
I think a really good place to start is learning what the difference is between different kinds of maximizers or brick wall limiters, things like limiters, clippers. Between clippers, you have soft and hard clippers. What makes clippers different from each other? You know, that kind of stuff. And then limiters, there's all sorts of decisions. So when someone is making a tool for you to maximize your music, they have all sorts of decisions they can make. And so it can be helpful to you in that you're trying to make music that sounds in a certain way to know why they're different and when you might want to use one or the other. And also to toot my own horn, why I know Master Plan's processing is special and what it's made for.
On our channel, we usually try to visualize things to really understand the inner workings of why things sound the way they sound.
Right.
You've put together some really cool demos of what sets Master Plan apart, but I think before we get there, we need to understand definitions. Soft clipper, hard clipper, limiter, etc. So you use this really cool thing, a Desmos session that I think does a pretty good job of doing that.
Oh, yeah. So Desmos is a graphing calculator online. And when a DSP guy or dev like me is trying to figure out what the math is going to do to a signal, it's a really handy tool for us to kind of see very quickly and play around with what's going to happen. And so I put together this graphing calculator chart to show what the difference is between a hard clipper and a soft clipper. So we'll talk about clippers first. A clipper's job is basically to shave off the top of signals when they go above or below the threshold that you've set. For hard clippers, this is just a hard cut operation. And for soft clippers, they use math that sort of gradually reduces gradually reduces the amplitude, so it doesn't have to do a hard cut.
If you're pretty new to the idea, you just say my music sounds quieter than the music I listen to on streaming.
Yeah.
Why couldn't I just turn it up? Let's say the 0 dB full scale is this one line, right? Why can't I just turn it up as loud as possible until it sounds correct, right? That would be kind of the equivalent of taking this clean and just turning this up. So I'll actually put a volume adjustment in here, and we know that it's coming out here at minus 7.5. So if we put 7.5 and play it, right?
Yeah.
Well, right here we're at minus 0.2.
That's
and if we go
in this track,
0.2 higher.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Well, then. Okay, now we're at 0, and already if we upload that file to Spotify, we're going to run into some problems because they're going to do some processing that we should really be leaving a little bit more what's called headroom above that. So that's why we need to figure out a way to, back to this graphing calculator, to turn up the peak level to where it doesn't exceed that 0 dB full scale, but in order to do that, we need to somehow compress the dynamic range. So we can do that either with soft clipping, we can do that with hard clipping, or we can do that 1,000 other ways using a plugin like Master Plan.
Right. So if we have, for example, here in Desmos, a signal, just a plain sine wave that's going through these different types of clippers, and we have three different things here. The red line, all of them are stacked on top of each other right now, which I can explain in a minute, but the red line is the pure sine wave. The green line is going to be a soft clipper, and the black line is going to be a hard clipper. Now notice, as you push more amplitude in to the wave, all three of these signals behave differently because they're making different decisions about what to do when the sound gets too loud. So the red line is the original sine wave. It does nothing. It's obviously, we're not trying to process it. We want to see what would happen if we did nothing. And this is what would happen. It would just get taller, right? Because amplitude, the loudness that we hear, or rather the gain, is going to be the distance between the peaks, right? The more we stretch it up and down, the louder it sounds. So it's not doing anything. The black and green lines are a hard and soft clipper, respectively. So a hard clipper is the easiest to understand. It is exactly the same as the sine wave within its limits. So if you look at the black line, it perfectly overlaps the red line. No distortion at all as long as your signal is within its bounds. But as soon as you go outside of the bounds, it just says, no, flat line, right? So a clipper is going to sound perfect for every single sample until the sample goes over, and then it's going to make a drastic change to the sound. One way to think about this is that it's holding all of the distortion that it adds to your signal to the moment it crosses the threshold and is above. And then everything else is crystal clear. This is why some people really like the sound of clippers. For certain types of music and applications, it's very good because if you're just trying to like shave off a couple things here and there, it's pretty quiet. Like the distortion isn't super noticeable all the time. Different people have different sensitivities to this or different tastes, but that's the advantage of a clipper. It's perfect up to its limit. The green line's a soft clipper, which takes an entirely different approach. It's also going to prevent the signal from passing its limits, but it's going to use some math that clamps down more and more on the signal as you push more and more volume into it, right? So the downside to this is that it begins to distort much sooner than a hard clipper would. But that's the trade-off that you make, right? The moment at which the sound goes over is going to have not any sort of particularly difficult distortion in it, because we've been gradually making it more and more distorted as you push into it, right? So if we put them both back on, the black and the green line, so we can see them, it just becomes more clear. The green line starts to deviate from the red line sooner. And then, if you push more and more volume into it, it begins to look more and more similar to a hard clipper because the hard clipper reaches its maximum really soon. So if you push A all the way to the right, we can see that the soft clipper begins to look more and more like a hard clipper. It just has all these smooth edges, right? So one way to think about a soft versus hard clipper is that a hard clipper has fewer moments of distortion, but those moments are more intense, and a soft clipper has much more continuous distortion to your signal, but it's less intense. And this is one of the decisions you make when you decide between using a hard clipper or a soft clipper or a combination between them.
In my understanding, not being a plugin developer, is that this math you've put into this graphing calculator is kind of the bare bones mechanics of these three things. But in reality, of course, the signal is the signal, but the soft clipper and the hard clipper can have some extra magic coded into the plugins. Is that right?
That's right. The most simple plugins, so maybe pack-ins and plugins that provide, say, like a simple mode or whatever, like they probably will do something similar to this. But the hard clippers, there's various tricks that different plugin manufacturers will use to make it sound different in certain ways. And the soft clipper, you can imagine, if you ever went through geometry in school, there's all sorts of different curves that you can make. So there's all sorts of different ways people can use the math to make a soft clipper. And those are going to change the characteristics of that green line in one way or another. You could argue one is better or worse, but whether or not they're better or worse, it's much more about what is the characteristic of that sound. So certain soft clippers have a more famous sound than others because they generally tend to be liked more, but that doesn't mean they're right or wrong. It just means they have different characteristics that work better for different scenarios. That's a very democratic thing to say, but it's the truth, whenever a DSP engineer meets a mathematician, they can have fun making soft clippers all day long. See what it sounds like.
And it's one thing to see it on a graph. We are going to do some audio examples later on, but before we get there, maybe we look at something that is actually happening over time rather than this, right? Because maybe the behavior of the soft clipper and of the hard clipper here has some implications for what happens here, and this has some implications for what happens here. Whereas on this graph right now, these are all exactly the same. And what happens before and after doesn't really impact what's happening on this graph. Right. Is that true?
That's true. So one thing that's important to know about clippers and soft clippers, at least the strict definition of them, is that it's just one of these things. It's a little, in the mathy guys, if you ever hear the word transfer function, that's what nerds like me will call it. But all it means is a number comes in and you know exactly what number comes out. It doesn't matter what happens in the future. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. If I put in a particular number, I always know I'm going to get out some other number. And that number that I get out is always the same for a given number that goes in. Again, just like on our graphing calculator, as soon as you push too hard, it just snips the top off. That's all you get. So it's the same scenario as we saw in our plugin. We just have the waveform's more smashed because the window is a rectangle instead of a square, whatever. So that's how a hard clipper works, very similar to what we've seen. Let's take a look at a soft clipper to make sure that that's still a reasonable representation. We're just doing the live version of this. And there we go. We see that sort of rounded but symmetrical shape. Yep. And as we boost more volume into it, there it goes. But they're using a slightly different mathematical formula because, as you push more boost into there, at a certain point, you get a flat top and a little tiny sharp edge. So they're doing something different than what I put in the graphing calculator. Like I said, there's all sorts of math and decisions you can make, which is cool. It's just that, but the general idea is the same. It's about rounding out the edge of those clips. And you can also see that the waveform starts to look different than a regular sine wave pretty quickly. It looks moundy.
Yeah, even before reaching that maximum limit, it looks a lot different than it did before. And I think even right here, that's probably happening. So if I take down the tone generator fader that feeds that, it's going to start to look a little bit different already.
Yep.
And then I'll put that back to Unity. And as you continue to boost it, then we start to get more extreme.
So we've talked about limiters and clippers, and they're just kind of number goes in, number goes out. I want to talk about limiters now. And this is a much harder concept to just talk about. It's not that it's hard to understand once you get, it's hard to describe. I kind of want to distinguish between hard to understand versus hard to describe. So if my language is difficult, please ask me to clarify. The main difference, and this is true for compressors as well, compressors and limiters, they have kind of an onset effect, right? So the more, as you push into it, it starts to react more and more to what's going on. So it's not as simple as, oh, if I know the input value, I know the output value. It's every value depends on the history of values that led up to it. It's saying, hey, if I react too quickly or just hard mathematically, it's too jarring or harsh of a sound. So, I want to find a way maybe to react only when I really, really, really need to, right? Because I would prefer my sound to be more transparent. And if I'm not going to end up going over, I don't want to distort. So one way to solve this problem is to be like, okay, look, you start entering the zone where I care. This would be your threshold for junkies of the terms. If I start to enter the area where I care, now I need to clamp down on the volume, and I need to do it more and more over time, right? And that way, if I'm just skirting the edge and then I don't actually touch it, there's less overall distortion. There's less, sorry, I smacked my microphone. There's less overall distortion that happens to the sound, but it still does distort it, just less because it has to start pushing the brakes on. Now, the speed at which it puts on the brakes, that's what you're probably used to seeing called attack, right? It means the volume's getting louder, I got to clamp down. How hard do I slam on the brakes? Do I have a lead foot, or am I, just really lackadaisical? There's your SAT word for the day. And then on the way out, it's, okay, I've noticed that the volume has gotten quieter. How quickly do I release the brakes and let the volume come up? And so the attack and the release are what you play with to determine the kind of character of the compressor. And there's even more mathematical decisions for all this, which is why there's even more compressors and limiters on the market than there are clippers, because there's so many different combinations of things that you can choose to do. If you ever hear the word ballistics when talking about compressors or limiters, that's what they're talking about. They're literally just talking about how fast and what way do I slam on the brakes, how fast and what way do I let go of the brakes, right? With a limiter, usually at least with the limiter in terms of maximization, we want a brick wall. We want to get all the way up to the maximum value, and then be like, you literally can go no further. I want no overs, no peaking in my actual output file, right? I can draw a clipped waveform, but I don't want that number to go above 1 or below -1 and explode on my listeners' system, right? So we usually have the attacks extremely quick. And much more often on a limiter that's used for maximization, you're playing with the release. Because if you release too slowly, you're going to have a problem where the sound, after something has slammed it down, maybe you hit a snare or kick, or something goes really loud. If you make it take too long to recover the volume, you're going to hear the recovery in volume, and it'll sound sort of pumpy. If you have it too quick, then you're going to be overreactive. It'd be like if you're riding in a car and someone has a lead foot and you're slamming on the brakes and letting go, then slamming and letting go, slamming and letting go. And you're going to start to hear problems again because you're changing the volume of the sound so fast that it itself becomes its own sound, and you get a bunch of distortion. And we hate that too. So all the tricks in limiters are about how do I make this process of making it louder transparently easy for people, because at the end of the day, that's what we want to do. We want to push the volume. We don't want to change the sound. And that's hard to do. Now, I just did a lot of talking. Let's open up a limiter and take a look at what it looks like in an oscilloscope. Sound good?
Okay, I'm going to use a really popular limiter, Ozone.
And I want to preface this, and I know I sell and I've made a product that does some of these same things. I'm not trying to install Ozone here. It's a great product and whatever. I'm just trying to show the difference between these classical techniques, and I'm using Ozone as a poster child for what limiters do. That's it. That's all I'm trying to do here. It's not, I'm not trying to badmouth it at all. I have great respect for what Isotope has done over the years, and it's really cool. And we can show some cool stuff that they've done here, but also what it does to your sound. So let's take a look if we put a test signal through a limiter. Okay, cool. And if we look at the bottom, we can see there's both a limiter and a compressor here. We've turned the compressor off by making its ratio 1:1, meaning don't ever change the sound. So I don't know what their internal stuff is, but supposedly that's how it should work. But our limiter is on, and it's got a very fast attack, and it's got a pretty fast release. And if we push more volume into the limiter, which I guess we can do in this case just by pushing the threshold down, we can see that in this case, unlike the clippers, the change that's made to the waveform is not symmetrical, right? We have a different shape going in than coming out of the loudness change. We picked a very slow form. Now this is not good or bad. It simply shows the different decisions that are made in order to get the sound to be different, right? Because we're changing the amount that we're putting on the brakes over time, it's going to make our waves no longer symmetrical. And we can see that there's a fast attack and slow release because there's a much more drastic change in the shape of the signal on the leading edges than there is on the trailing edges, right? And so that's what it's doing. If we increase the release, we're going to see even smoother stuff. And you might be asking the question, okay, well, hold on a minute. You just said that the release is for the way out of a waveform, right? But I'm seeing the way in also changing. That's a little bit of a mind trick, because what's happening is when you have a very slow release, the volume is not even allowed to go up again. So there's nothing to change when the waveform gets to its higher or lower point. So a slower release is going to make your track overall more quiet because it's not allowing the volume to go up, but it will allow for less distortion because it's not having to slam and pull back on the brakes as reactively, right? So these are the kinds of decisions you make when working with this. So this is a classic type of limiter, right? It's still trying to shave off the top in a nice way. There's another kind of limiter that Ozone has in here where they've combined kind of these different techniques, right? So that's going to be the maximizer. And you might use this for the final, for much more like you might use master plan. And it's just combining these clipping and limiting techniques. Let's look at the character knob at the very bottom. And in the lower left, it's going to look a lot more like a clipper. Pop it all the way. Boom, clipper. On the far right, it's going to look a lot more like a limiter. And it's just sort of deciding which of these two algorithms to use, but all of their shortcomings are still intact. The clipper is still going to cut real hard, and the limiter is still going to have these asymmetrical shapes on every single waveform because that's how you do it. Now, there's a lot more features here, but all of those things are going to be about you as the user deciding to make all these trade-offs in order to have your music sound the best given the various types of sound that might come in, right? And this can be very difficult. It's very ear-based, and sometimes it's more control. I think a lot of the time, it's more control than you need because there are a lot of things that these tools aren't doing. They're just taking the existing techniques and throwing them together in various different combinations, and then telling you, here's a bunch of knobs, figure it out, right? Okay, so it's in looking at all of these things that I create, or that Stan and I decided to make master plan, because we're like, look, hey, there's a whole bunch, and I'm going to show you master plan in Plugin Doctor, but master plan is its own combination of these techniques, but it's not really either of them. It doesn't do the limiting thing. There's no attack or release. It's not. There's some clipping involved, but it doesn't just do clipping either, because it's a lot cleaner. We can do some listening examples later, but let's open Plugin Doctor and take a look at what a couple of these things might do.
Before I do that, I want to say that you can get a free trial with the link in the description below to Master Plan. It's 10 days. Is that right, Sam?
Yeah, 10 days.
So this right here, Plugin Doctor, just to explain for those who haven't seen this before, I love using this for my videos. You're able to select two plugins up here at the top. So right now in slot 1, you added in Master Plan, and then in slot 2, we'll show the Maximizer again, just to compare. So what are we looking at here, Sam, first?
So Plugin Doctor is like kind of a double-edged sword. There's a lot of information in here, and like any charts, it's difficult to always interpret what it's doing. So to anyone that decides that they want to use this, always double-check your assumptions with listening tests, which we'll do afterwards, because it can be hard to read the graph. Sometimes a graph matters less than you think. Sometimes it matters more than you think. But I'm going to talk about why I think a particular graph is important and matters. Yeah, cool. And right now we have the maximizer pulled up, right? And it's the maximizer. Yeah, and the maximizer is the one that has that little character knob, so we'll show some different decisions. So first of all, because we were using the maximizer last inside of Reaper, let's use it inside of Plugin Doctor. So let's zoom out, and instead of muting Master Plan, let's unmute the maximizer here. Yeah, cool. And we can mute Master Plan. Let's zoom in and make the waveform smaller.
Do you want to stick with 143 hertz?
No, let's do something real slow, just so it's easy to see. Let's try like 20 or 10 hertz or something. Perfect.
Yeah, and just for those who didn't recognize, our tone generator before was at 10 hertz, so well below the frequencies we'll actually be dealing with. But that was a good way to visualize a long time per wavelength, right?
Right.
To see how these things would respond to the leading and the beginning and the end of those waves.
Right.
So I'm going to actually close this tone generator. That's no longer in play.
Got it.
And then now we're looking at this tone generator, which is currently at 20 hertz.
Yeah, we can put it anywhere, really. We'll do that, actually. We'll change it, but just to make sure there's no like tricks here. But like, okay, if we push harder into the maximizer by moving the gain knob in here, we're going to start to see what the maximizer does to the waveform, right? So it's clearly a different shape, and it's making some mathematical decisions about what to do, right, in this oscilloscope. Cool. Now let's go into Master Plan and do the same thing. So mute that, do the same thing. You can't phase it. There's slight changes as you're moving the knob because the oscilloscope has to it's going to show you a frame that's behind and then whatever. But the point is, we wanted to design a tool that it's not going to do anything to the sound that it thinks is going to distort it. So it'll push it as loud as it possibly can, and it's not going to mess with it if it doesn't have to. I mean, we don't even see any flat tops on those curves.
And that's plus 20 dB right there.
So we can see a little bit of something, probably because of the saturation curve in master plan. But there's no, like, which is it's part of its box tone. But there's no, we're not harming the tops of those at all. We're being very, very, very subtle, if any changes, until you get to really extreme values. And again, if we go to the maximizer, ba-boom, and slam into it, we're going to see some pretty big differences. And in the maximizer, there's that tone control. So we can go into the maximizer, open up the maximizer, and we can play with that different control. Let's increase the volume a fair amount inside of Plugin Doctor. Cool, that's enough. And then in the Ozone Maximizer, we can move the character knob left and right. It's just changing the sort of shape, right? The closest we seem to be able to get to our original waveform, left is a hard clip. The closest we seem to be able to get is we move to the far right. Cool. All right, so that's one way to look at how these different things respond. Let's look at a more detailed view of what's going on. This is just a constant test signal. So let's click the Dynamics tab. Okay, and now let's look at master plan again. Why not? Okay, cool. Now, when I say it's important to know how to kind of read these graphs, another thing is the loud knob on master plan is pushed way up. Let's push it to like +4 or something, maybe +6. Anything's fine, but yeah. Let's start at +12. Why not? Let's go to noon. Perfect. Okay, cool. So here we have the dynamics view in Plugin Doctor, and what this view is showing is on the smaller waveforms, it's basically playing a quiet signal at -20 dB for a second. Then for 2 seconds, it's playing a loud signal all the way up at 0. And then it's going back to the original -20 dB volume. Right? Now, when I say it's important to know how to read these kinds of charts, the stuff that's going on the right side over there is not actually causing lots of distortions. It's sort of an artifact of the way the thing draws the waveforms and the thing that it's moving. So you're going to see this in the vast majority of all plugins you use are going to do something like this when they're doing dynamics. But what we want to look at is the shape of the waveforms in the loud section, because that's where we might see things be different, right? So if we look at master plan, and let's look at the tips of some of the waveforms in the loud section. So if we zoom in, so we still have pretty clean tops, except for the very first one, right? And that's pretty nice. Let's mute this and take a look at Ozone. All right, cool. So it also has pretty clean tops when this character is pushed to the far right. But now let's zoom out. Oh, the gain. Sorry, of course it's clean. The gain on Ozone's at 0. Let's go back. I was
let's
like,
math
wait a minute.
So right now we're
dB.
seeing master plan overlaid on top of it, and we can see that the quiet parts are considerably louder. So here we'll go ahead and
let's do the same gain
up.
equivalence. 12 dB is where we are in master plan.
Yeah. Okay, that looks about pretty close.
Pretty close. We see a little bit more volume in master plan, but whatever. The very first thing that we can see is the. Let's mute master plan real quick. We can see the release. On the right side here, while the form looks more stable, we know that it's quieter when you initially, when the signal starts to go back down in volume so that we can raise it. We know that it's quieter because this thing happens over a fairly long period of time. Well, in audio, a fairly long period of time, right? So that's the drawback there. If we turn master plan back on, we do see this kind of warble at the edge. And again, like this is about reading the chart. I'm almost, Kyle, I'm almost a little weird about people maybe drawing attention to this as some sort of sound artifact, but it's not. The point is, it's immediately as wide, like vertically, as it was before. It just immediately pops back to the right volume. If you move the character knob, actually, now let's take a look at the loud section of, let's take a zoom in at the loud section now. Perfect. Okay, cool. So we do know that we have that release problem on Ozone, right? But if we move the character knob now to the left on Ozone, we start to see the distortion in all loud material is going to be distorted. And as far left, it's just a clipper, right? And so really you're just controlling how distorted do I want my loud stuff to be. Whereas with master plan, it's always going to be clean. If we unmute master plan, which is also at +12, it should still, clean shape. So let's mute master plan again, zoom back out. So the idea is with Ozone, you're playing between, do I want to have my loud sound distort, which is with the character knob on the left? Because in some cases, that actually is what you want because there are only very brief moments where it matters. And on the right side, you're like, okay, maybe there's less distortion for those moments, but I'm going to have to deal with knowing what do I want my release speed to be. And it's going to overall be a little quieter because it's going to constantly be kind of undulating back to full volume, right? So that's the trade-off. That's what you get. And there's other knobs that you can mess with here, but most of them just add more processing to the sound. It's not going to change the basic way that works. With master plan, it's immediate recovery, and you also have clear waveforms when it's loud, and you don't have to turn any knobs. And that's why it's so transparent right from the get-go. And that's also why it's brand new technology. Like we've had to spend a lot of time developing it and making sure that it can do this stuff no matter what material you throw at it. So we should do some listening tests because obviously nobody is releasing records of pure sine waves unless they're trying to game the algorithm on Spotify and naming tracks after like famous people. So let's do some listening, I think, is a good idea.
Like Sam said, we're never going to be mixing 20 hertz waveforms, 10 hertz waveforms. We're going to be mixing music, and that's what really matters. It also matters how it sounds, not just how it looks on a graph. So luckily, a friend of mine, an artist, Room 111, has offered to give us this track loaded. This is pre-master, so this doesn't have any master bus effects. This is like what you'd receive as a mastering engineer from a mixing engineer. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
So here is just the raw track.
We can hear subtly in this mix is the release of a compressor after each of the kick drums. There's a slight, the track is breathing with a kick. That is an example of how you might use a slower release to have, it kind of gives the track momentum. So again, like these things aren't good or bad. They're tools you use to get certain feelings with your sound. Sorry, I just had to bring that out because I noticed it.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, like you said, we're not trying to say one plugin is better than the other. One way to use one plugin is better than the other. Honestly, anybody who tells you that is not telling the full truth, right? It really depends on the track, on the person who's mixing, on the intention of the artist. And that's a really good ear to call that out, how the audible release, less transparency in the limiter or the compressor can actually have a pumping effect that lends itself to accentuating the beat of the track. That's really cool. Not bad.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Now, there's a lot of headroom in this track, right? So we should be able to push it pretty hard.
I think so. Let's look at where it's coming up. Yeah, minus 7.5.
Cool. So we know the first 7-ish are just for free. Unless you're a soft clipper, because you know soft clippers distort before. Well, so do limiters, but they're going to be better at it again because they react over time. Well, let's start with the hard clipper. And we're going to take a look at that and notice it doesn't have a boost to boost volume into it. So we're going to add a trim before the hard clipper just to push into it. And we know our track is at -7 or something where it peaks. We're going to be pushing 13 dB into this track, meaning that the peaks are now going to be what, 7 plus 6 is 13. Yeah, they're going to be 6 dB above. We could probably push it harder than that. What we'll do is we'll come back to this, and here where we start to hear distortion. Actually, let's just do that. Let's put the adjustment at 0 and keep pushing volume into it till we start to hear it distort. That's going to be fun. This will be our baseline.
And just for anybody who's not really following along, I'm going to mute the master track here. I'll press play, and we can see that the music is coming out at minus 7.5 with peaks, and then I have plus 6 here, which takes us just at 0 dB. And as I continue to go up, it's going to not tell us the exact
well, that
because
is a
it's
lot
going
of dB
over
in there.
full scale. But
Yikes.
yeah, it's 67 dB over. So
Never do
but
that.
just so you know the mechanics of this, if I take this now to 0, we should see about the same level on each of these. Okay, so I'll mute it. I will unmute the master track, and now we can hear what's going on. So you said, Sam, we should progressively overload this plugin by adjusting this slider?
Yeah, no, this doesn't have any kind of unity mode, so we're not going to be able to do volume adjustment maybe till after the fact. So let's, we can, once we get it to distort, well, then we can then bring it down so we can then compare. But let's just start pushing volume until it's just no good, right?
Let's go ahead and unbypass the plugin.
What happens a lot of times where I listen for it first, where it starts to sneak in, is in the bass. You'll start to hear a little on the onsets of your kick drums. This what often is described as crunchiness, right? Again, desirable in some cases, but not during mastering generally. Yeah.
So what we'll do is, with that in mind, we'll start again at 0 dB, and then we'll slowly increase the input level. But like Sam just suggested, listen specifically to the low frequencies and hear if you can hear that saturation start to occur.
Yeah, there's stuff that happens in the high as well. I just sometimes feel like it's, when doing a listening exercise, that tends to be where I hear it first on new material. This track happens to respond really well to a hard clipper, I think. I don't know. What's your opinion, Kyle?
I agree. I think, like you said, it's very dynamic, and the transients that are coming through are the ones that would hit the hard clipper first. And it kind of it fits. We could keep going.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's try a soft clipper.
So we'll start at 0 and we'll slowly work our way up, but be aware that the gain level will change as well as any sort of distortion.
Unlike the hard clipper, where when it starts to break up in a noticeable way, we hear really intense crunch, the high frequencies on the soft clipper are sort of rolled off, and you hear more of like a baseline disintegration, kind of stuff going on down at the bottom. And also there's a saturation that starts to show up in the track itself, which isn't isn't a characteristic of the hard clipper. So it's just a different character of Maximizer. Now we can try Master Plan or Ozone or whatever. Why don't we do Ozone?
So I'll start with this gain down at 0 dB, and we'll slowly work our way up again.
So to me, and I'm hearing this as well as seeing it, it's pumping. And the reason is that we've set the character on the bottom left corner to very slow. And that's because the release time is slow. So after the hits, it's accentuating even more the kind of rebuild in volume. So let's play with the character knob a little bit. But it's definitely changing the rhythmic feel of that track when you push volume into it. A lot more than the other two are. But that is because we have an extreme setting for characters, so it's not really fair to Ozone for this use case because it's not, But let's do it. Let's see.
Do you want to keep the gain as it is here, or
let's keep the gain and just play with the character.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So here we're starting it slow, very slow on the right side, and the left side will be like a clipper.
So you can notice immediately the perceived loudness of a clipper is higher because it's trying to recover from those volume changes, right? And so your job is going to be how much gain do I push in and where do I put that character knob in order to get the best balance of all that stuff. But definitely on the far right, it's worse than the clippers. So it's good they have the character knob in there.
And there are a lot of variables in here, like you'd mentioned, which is one thing that I like about Master Plan, because as you can see, there's a loud knob, and there's still a lot of power, right? There's still a lot of power. But it is doing it's doing one thing. That's its main focus, right?
Right. It doesn't. What it's doing. Yeah, everything depends a bit on the material, but the work that it's doing on every single sample that's going through there, it's doing something different than something like Ozone does that will allow it to squeeze the maximum loudness out of something without it distorting. That's why when we threw it in plugin Doctor, it never shaved the, like on an oscilloscope or whatever, it never, once it knows that you can't push any more volume to anything, it's like, well, I'm not doing that because it doesn't want to distort the audio to whatever degree it can avoid that distortion. So that being said, we can play with this loud knob as well and see where it goes for this given track.
So we'll do the same thing here with Master Plan and listen. So let's unmute the Master Plan.
Got it right up to the point, yeah? What we should do now is kind of compare at the same volume level. Where are we at a Master Plan? 17.5.
17.52.
So let's put 17.52 into both the soft and hard clipper and Master Plan. And then we can do Ozone 2 as well, if you like. Let's put its character knob, I think, starts sort of leftish. I don't remember. We can set it to its default value or whatever you want to do on Ozone. And let's compare the way that these various things sound with the same amount of level pushed in for different stuff.
So let's start with the hard clipper. And I'm going to take off the plugins from the screen I don't know about you, Sam, but I heard, I'll put that in quotes, some distortion when we had the meter in Ozone earlier than I did on the others, which kind of tells me that I didn't really hear anything, probably. I probably saw that it reached that. And, you know, I'm not saying that I don't like meters, but you got to be careful with that kind of thing.
100% agree.
Yeah,
That's
especially
why we have,
if the plugin's in bypass.
yeah, exactly. 100% agree. And that's actually, and this is a controversial decision we made when we made Master Plan, but we don't have a lot of metering on Master Plan beyond the number values, because I do think that you can get distracted by them. Now, we've been talking internally about, you know, what we should do down the line, but I think it's very important for you to do what Kyle's saying and hide the interface and listen. And if you can't hear something, definitely second guess yourself. You know, it's like the listening experience is more important than the visuals, because whoever's listening to your music will never see those meters ever. So they don't matter outside of your head. So just remember that.
We'll start here again at Hard Clipper, and then we're actually going to go through all of these.
There's something that's, to me, I love the sound of Master Plan, so I'm biased, but to me, there's something where the transients are just, they hit harder and sharper, and like it sounds really crystal clear to me. But that's up to, you know, you may have your own opinion, but that's something that I hear as a different thing from the Hard Clipper. And if we push them, I think we should be able to push Master Plan a little further than a Hard Clipper too.
If you were to give advice to somebody who's new to listening for these changes, what would you say to them?
Okay. If you're trying to listen to these changes, there's a few things you want to. First thing, listen for crunch in the bass. So when you have the kick drum hit or a bass, you're going to start to hear a bass growl, or a kick drum start to have a little like farty noise towards the beginning of it. And that's how you know you're pushing too hard, especially in the subtones. And you're going to want to back off. In the high end, you're going to hear, it's going to be like a harshness when something hits that's just too intense. And you're going to want to back off that. The other things that you're going to want to listen for are pumping. So if you're using limiters, you're going to want to listen for, does the volume seem to be fluctuating? Because we don't want that. Anytime when the volume feels like it's fluctuating, it's going to be fighting whatever the rhythm of your track is, right? And that's not good, because that's what your mixing engineer and producer did, right? They were trying to give the track a feeling. So if your mastering process fights that by pumping, it's always going to be muddled in terms of like rhythmic clarity. So you're going to want to listen for that. The other thing you're going to want to listen to is the tonal balance of what's going on, right? So as you push loud stuff into things, you begin, as you push something louder, you begin to hear different things in the sound. Master Plan addresses this by having a bunch of knobs to help you affect those, but even just basically, it might be that your maximizer is doing clever tricks with multi-band compression or other stuff. So when there's a hit, you might hear the mid-range drop out, or a high part drop out, or the low part drop out, or some sort of tonal shift. So you're going to want to listen for that as well. And the way you're going to listen for it is one thing, but you may also feel it, right? If all of a sudden you don't get the snap out of your snare anymore, or the kick sounds muted or something like that, that may also be the effect of the limiter. So there's a lot of different things to listen for. There's unfortunately no one trick. But my go-tos are listen for growling and farting in the bass and in the kick drum. And on the high end, those hits should remain crispy without the tonal balance of the track changing, like the mids dropping out or something ducking when things get high.
I heard one of the biggest differences when I went between Soft Clipper and Master Plan in the transients. Just the transient seemed to be really rounded away with the Soft Clipper. Whereas, you know, the level It does change a little bit, the perceived loudness throughout each of these. On an ideal test, we would probably match all of those because, like you said, these aren't all so simple as this amount of input level equals this amount of output LUFS or something, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
But what I did notice in this test was that the soft clipper really sounded a lot more rounded or maybe a blunt transient rather than the sharper transient that I guess that has to do with the way Masterplan is intending to preserve the transients even as we bring up the overall level.
That's right. If you wanted to do a scientific test, let's say we were going to like do some kind of research study, right? We probably would get the exact LUFS values for all of these and make sure that all the LUFS values match and everything, and then have a lot of listening. That would take a lot of preparation for, and we would also want to do a lot of different material, right? So this is a particular type of track. What do you call this? What do you call this genre? It's sort of like I don't know, but it's great. It's got kind of 80s feel to it. But you know, you want to try hip hop, you want to try jazz or classical music that has very high dynamic range. How does it respond to? You want to try acoustic stuff, singer-songwriters, folk music, rock, screamo, witch house, funk, like everything. You know what I mean? All music counts. And then you would normalize across LUFS levels and listen on different stuff. Yeah, but if you want very clean sounding masters without having to do a lot of thinking and focusing more on the other aspects of just little tweaks to make things sound right, you're going to get a lot further, a lot faster with something like Masterplan than with pure soft hard clippers or limiters, which they're all hard leaning into one strategy, or with Ozone where it gives you a lot of different controls, but it's not really clear where you need to go, and by default, it doesn't just get you there. And then the other option, which is sort of similar to maybe the Ozone approach, would be stacking multiple clippers and limiters, which is also fairly complicated. And people are religious about this. They'll have like a combination of 3 or 4 in a particular order, spaced throughout some kind of chain, right? So it's about like what's going to give me really great results without spending a lot of time on something that I don't even get to really be creative about. I'm just trying to get good loudness without messing with what's there. I'm not trying to create a whole new vibe using this tool.
Just to sum it up, I think preparation. Thank you, Sam, for all the preparation you did put into this, because you and I met for an hour plus 2 times prior to this to educate me on a lot of these things. You shared a lot of knowledge with me, and we also did painstakingly choose different oscilloscope tests, and you made the graphing calculator demonstration, and of course we chose the audio demonstration. I think the ultimate test would probably be to get the free trial of Masterplan. I'm sure some other plugins have free trials as well.
Yeah.
Download it, put it on your own music, and that's how you tell the difference between each of these, and that's also how you get better at doing what you want to be great at someday in doing those tests, right? So you can find the link to download the free trial to Masterplan in the description below. Big thanks to Room 111 with that track loaded. If you want to hear more of that, I've got the Spotify page also linked below. Sam, biggest thanks to you, because I can really tell talking to you that this wasn't just a sales pitch for your plugin. It was really a passionate conversation about something you feel really passionate about. And of course, you made Masterplan the way it is because I can tell you really care about this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important to me that people I don't know, I want people to feel confident doing the thing that they want to do to their audio. So, you know, understanding what it is that you're doing without feeling like you have to memorize a million different things or learn these complex, ridiculous stuff. It's like, trust your ears, put different tools on, try them out, know kind of the general concepts, and really don't get too religious about anything, because you will find sometimes that you can get a lot out of something when you give yourself a space to open up the mind. it's very freeing. And I personally want to always make tools that allow people to do that, to spend more time on the things that are interesting that they want to creatively control, and less time on the technical things where they just have a destination in mind, and it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there. That's not what I want people to have to spend time on. I'd rather they spend time on things that you feel expressive and creative in. That's my philosophy anyway.